Elena Martinez stood at the edge of the naval recruitment fair, watching dozens of young men and women in crisp uniforms demonstrate their skills. The autumn wind whipped through her long black hair as she clutched a worn manila envelope containing documents that could change everything. At 24, she had spent the last 6 years working odd jobs to support her younger brother through college, but her dreams of serving her country had never faded. The recruitment station buzzed with activity. Officers sat behind tables covered with pamphlets and application forms, while potential recruits lined up to speak with representatives from different branches of the military. Elena had been planning this moment for months, saving every penny to travel from her small hometown to the capital city where the fair was being held. As she approached the naval recruitment table, she noticed several other applicants already engaged in animated conversations with the officers. Most were young men who looked like they had just graduated from prestigious military academies. Their confidence was evident in the way they stood, spoke, and presented themselves. Elena felt a knot form in her stomach as she realized how out of place she looked in her simple dress and worn shoes. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen looked up as Elena approached. The officer had kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Elena at ease. Behind her sat 2 other recruiters who were busy processing applications from other candidates. Elena cleared her throat and stepped forward. "Excuse me, I would like to apply for the Naval Academy program." She placed her envelope on the table with hands that trembled slightly, despite her efforts to remain calm. Lieutenant Commander Chen opened the envelope and began reviewing Elena's documents. Her high school transcripts showed excellent grades in mathematics and science, but she had attended a small rural school that none of the recruiters recognized. Her letters of recommendation came from local teachers and her former boss at the hardware store, where she had worked for 3 years. One of the other recruiters, a young lieutenant named Brooks, glanced over at Elena's application and smirked. Another small-town dreamer. "NDS?" he whispered to his colleague loud enough for Elena to hear. "Probably thinks the Navy is like what she sees in movies." Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her eyes focused on Lieutenant Commander Chen, who continued reviewing her materials. The older officer's expression remained neutral as she examined each document carefully. A group of candidates who had been waiting nearby began to take notice of the exchange. One of them, a tall young man named Marcus, who wore an expensive watch and spoke with the polished accent of someone from a wealthy family, looked Elena up and down dismissively. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Marcus asked with a condescending smile. "The community college fair is probably down the street." His friends chuckled at his comment, and Elena felt the familiar sting of being judged for her background. Elena straightened her shoulders and met Marcus's gaze directly. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied quietly, but firmly. She had faced this kind of mockery before and had learned not to let it shake her resolve. Lieutenant Brooks continued his commentary, apparently finding entertainment in the situation. "Look at this, Chen. She's got references from a hardware store manager and a high school guidance counselor. Real impressive stuff." He laughed and shook his head. "What's next? A recommendation letter from the local grocery store clerk?" The crowd of applicants grew larger as more people began to pay attention to what was happening. Elena could feel dozens of eyes on her, and the whispers and snickers grew louder. Someone in the back called out, "Maybe she should try the Coast Guard instead. They're always looking for lighthouse keepers." Despite the humiliation burning in her chest, Elena remained standing straight, her hands clasped behind her back in a position she had practiced countless times in front of her bedroom mirror. She had dreamed of this moment for too long to let a few cruel comments drive her away. Lieutenant Commander Chen finally looked up from the documents. "Miss Martinez, these are impressive academic records. Your mathematics and physics scores are in the top percentile, and your letters speak very highly of your character and work ethic." She paused, studying Elena's face. "Tell me, what draws you to naval service?" Before Elena could answer, Marcus interrupted with another laugh. "Come on, Commander. Look at her. She probably thinks submarines run on diesel engines, and that radar is some kind of new technology. This is just embarrassing for everyone involved." The crowd erupted in more laughter, and Elena felt her confidence wavering for the first time. She had expected the application process to be challenging, but she had not anticipated this level of public humiliation. Her hands began to shake slightly, and she wondered if coming here had been a terrible mistake. Lieutenant Brooks leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "I have to agree with the candidate here. And a number, all they will seem that it happener. We're looking for serious applicants, not people who are just looking for a way out of their small towns. The Navy isn't a charity program for people who can't afford college." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to give up now. Taking a deep breath, she looked directly at Lieutenant Commander Chen and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire recruitment area. "Commander, I understand that my background might not look impressive compared to others here. I didn't attend a prestigious preparatory school, and my family doesn't have military connections, but I've wanted to serve my country since I was old enough to understand what that meant. I've studied naval history and maritime strategy on my own time. I can recite the specifications of every class of destroyer in the current fleet, and I know the tactical advantages of different sonar configurations in various ocean environments." The laughter died down as Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've worked since I was 16 to support my family, and I've learned that real strength doesn't come from where you start, but from how hard you're willing to work to get where you want to be. If you give me a chance, I'll prove that dedication and determination matter more than privilege and connections." The recruitment area fell silent. Even Marcus had stopped smirking, though he still looked skeptical. Lieutenant Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his seat, apparently realizing that his comments had been unnecessarily harsh. Lieutenant Commander Chen nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "That's exactly the kind of attitude we look for in naval officers, Miss Martinez. However, I have to be honest with you about the challenges you'll face. The Academy is extremely demanding, both academically and physically. The competition is fierce, and the training is designed to push candidates to their absolute limits." Elena nodded eagerly. "I understand, Commander. I've been preparing for this for years. I run 5 miles every morning. I've taught myself advanced calculus and physics, and I've been learning about naval leadership principles from every book I could find. I'm not afraid of hard work." At that moment, a commotion near the entrance of the recruitment fair caught everyone's attention. A black sedan with government plates had pulled up to the curb, and several security personnel emerged first, scanning the crowd with professional alertness. The conversations around the recruitment tables gradually died down as people turned to see what was happening. A tall figure in an immaculate naval uniform stepped out of the sedan. Even from a distance, Elena could see the stars on his shoulder boards that marked him as a high-ranking officer. Admiral William Harrison was known throughout the naval community as one of the most respected leaders in the service. His presence at a recruitment fair was unusual and immediately drew the attention of every recruiter and candidate in the area. Admiral Harrison had served for over 30 years, rising through the ranks based on merit and an uncanny ability to identify talent in unexpected places. He had commanded ships in 3 different theaters of operation and was currently responsible for overseeing Naval Academy admissions and officer training programs. His reputation for fairness and his commitment to excellence had earned him respect throughout the military hierarchy. As the Admiral approached the recruitment area, Lieutenant Commander Chen and her colleagues immediately stood at attention. The candidates, sensing the importance of the moment, also straightened up and tried to look their best. Marcus smoothed down his hair and adjusted his posture, clearly hoping to make a good impression on such a high-ranking officer. Admiral Harrison walked slowly through the recruitment area, stopping occasionally to speak with officers and candidates. His presence commanded respect, but there was also something approachable about his demeanor that put people at ease. He had the bearing of someone who had earned his position through years of dedicated service rather than political connections. When he reached Lieutenant Commander Chen's table, he returned the salute of the recruiting officers and then surveyed the group of candidates who had gathered around. His experienced eyes moved from person to person, taking in details that others might miss. Elena found herself holding her breath as his gaze swept past her. though she wasn't sure why his opinion mattered so much to her. "How are we doing today, Commander Chen?" Admiral Harrison asked, in a voice that carried the authority of command, but also genuine interest in the answer. "Very well, Admiral. We've had quite a few promising candidates today," Lieutenant Commander Chen replied professionally. "In fact, we were just interviewing one young woman who shows exceptional promise despite some unique circumstances." Admiral Harrison's attention turned toward Elena, and she felt a moment of panic as she realized she was about to be put in the spotlight again. But there was something in the Admiral's expression that was different from the mockery she had faced earlier. He looked at her with the same careful attention he might give to any serious candidate. "And what makes this candidate exceptional?" the Admiral asked, his tone neutral but interested. Lieutenant Commander Chen gestured toward Elena's application materials. "Miss Martinez has outstanding academic credentials and has demonstrated remarkable self-motivation in preparing for naval service. However, some of the other candidates have expressed concerns about her background and qualifications." Admiral Harrison picked up Elena's transcripts and letters of recommendation, studying them with the same careful attention he might give to a strategic briefing. The recruitment area remained unusually quiet as everyone watched the Admiral review the documents. Elena could feel her heart pounding as she waited for his assessment. Marcus stepped forward, clearly seeing an opportunity to make himself stand out. "Admiral Harrison, sir, if I may," he said with the confident tone of someone accustomed to being heard. "I think what Commander Chen is trying to say diplomatically is that this young woman, while perhaps well-meaning, simply doesn't have the background necessary for naval service. She's from a small rural town with no military connections, and her preparation has been, well, rather informal." Several other candidates nodded in agreement, and Lieutenant Brooks seemed encouraged to voice his earlier concerns more directly. "Sir, with respect, we have limited spots in the Academy program, and they should go to candidates who have demonstrated serious commitment through proper channels. This applicant's materials, while showing effort, don't really meet the standards we typically expect." Admiral Harrison continued reading Elena's application without acknowledging the comments. His expression remained neutral, giving no indication of his thoughts. Elena watched his eyes move across the page, trying to read some sign of whether her dreams were about to be crushed or somehow salvaged. "Miss Martinez," the Admiral said finally, looking up from the documents, "I see here that you've been working to support your family while pursuing your education. That shows character. Tell me about your interest in naval strategy." Elena felt a surge of nervous energy as all attention focused on her once again. This was her chance to prove that she belonged here, despite what everyone else thought. She took a deep breath and began to speak with growing confidence. "Admiral, I've been fascinated by naval warfare since I read about the Battle of Midway in high school. The way Admiral Nimitz used intelligence and strategic positioning to overcome a numerically superior force showed me how leadership and tactical thinking can triumph over raw resources. I've studied the evolution of naval doctrine from the age of sail through modern electronic warfare." She paused, gathering her thoughts, then continued with increasing passion. "What really interests me is how naval commanders have to think in 3 dimensions, considering not just surface movements, but submarine threats and air support. The integration of different weapons systems and the coordination required for effective fleet operations represents some of the most complex problem-solving challenges in military history." Marcus rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. But Admiral Harrison held up a hand for silence, his attention completely focused on Elena's words. Elena continued, her nervousness fading, as she spoke about something she genuinely cared about. "I've been particularly interested in how modern naval operations require understanding of everything from satellite communications to ocean currents, the way GPS and sonar technology have changed submarine detection, and how electronic warfare capabilities have transformed fleet defense strategies." Admiral Harrison nodded slowly, his expression showing genuine interest. "That's a sophisticated understanding of naval operations, Miss Martinez. Where did you acquire this knowledge?" "From books, sir, and online resources. I know it's not the same as formal military education, but I've tried to learn as much as possible on my own. I've read everything from Alfred Thayer Mahan's writings on sea power to contemporary analyses of carrier strike group tactics. Lieutenant Brooks looked skeptical. Sir, book learning is one thing, but practical naval experience requires understanding that can't be gained from reading alone. These concepts are complex, and without proper instruction. Admiral Harrison turned his attention to Brooks, and something in his expression made the younger officer stop speaking immediately. Lieutenant, are you suggesting that intellectual curiosity and self-directed learning are not valuable qualities in naval officers? No, sir. Of course not, Brooks replied quickly, realizing he had overstepped. I just meant that formal training provides a foundation that— That what, Lieutenant? Admiral Harrison's voice carried a hint of steel. That guarantees competence? That somehow makes a candidate more worthy of consideration than someone who has demonstrated initiative and genuine interest in naval affairs? The Admiral turned back to Elena, his demeanor warming again. Miss Martinez, you mentioned the Battle of Midway. Can you tell me what you think was the most critical decision made by Admiral Nimitz in that engagement? Elena felt more confident now, sensing that she was being given a real chance to demonstrate her knowledge. I believe it was his decision to trust the intelligence reports about Japanese intentions despite the risks involved. He positioned his forces based on intercepted communications that many of his advisors questioned. By placing his carriers northeast of Midway rather than keeping them closer to Pearl Harbor, he was able to achieve tactical surprise, even though the Japanese had superior numbers. Admiral Harrison nodded approvingly. And what do you think that decision tells us about naval leadership? That effective commanders must be willing to take calculated risks based on the best available information, even when that information is incomplete or uncertain. But also that good intelligence gathering and analysis are just as important as tactical skill in achieving victory. The crowd of candidates and recruiters had grown larger as word spread that Admiral Harrison was conducting an impromptu interview. Elena could see other officers from different service branches gathering at the edges of the group, clearly interested in witnessing this unusual exchange. Marcus stepped forward again, his frustration evident. Admiral, with all due respect, anyone can memorize facts from history books. What we need in the Navy are people who can handle real pressure, people who have been tested in demanding environments. This candidate has never faced anything more challenging than small-town high school classes. Elena felt a flash of anger at Marcus's dismissive tone, but before she could respond, Admiral Harrison spoke again. You raise an interesting point about pressure and testing, young man. Tell me, what's your name? Marcus Whitfield, sir. My father is Colonel Whitfield, Army Corps of Engineers, and I've been preparing for military service my entire life at Riverside Military Academy. I see, Admiral Harrison replied. And you believe that your preparation has been more rigorous than Miss Martinez's? Crown. I may be where than Miss Martinez's. Martinez's? Marcus straightened proudly. Yes, sir. I do. I've completed 4 years of military training, including leadership courses and tactical exercises. I've maintained a perfect physical fitness record and achieved top grades in all my military science courses. Admiral Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Impressive credentials, Mr. Whitfield. Now, Miss Martinez, you mentioned that you've been working to support your family. Can you tell me about that? Elena hesitated, not wanting to sound like she was making excuses or looking for sympathy. Yes, sir. My father died when I was 18, and my mother has been unable to work due to health problems. I've been working multiple jobs to keep our house and help my younger brother finish college. It's meant I couldn't attend a military academy, but I've tried to stay focused on my goal of naval service. What kind of work have you been doing? Admiral Harrison asked. I worked at Martinez Hardware for 3 years, helping customers with everything from plumbing supplies to electrical components. I also worked part-time at a marina during summers, helping with boat maintenance and repairs. And I've been tutoring high school students in math and science to earn extra money. Admiral Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. You worked at a marina? What kind of boat maintenance? Engine repair mostly, sir. Small craft engines at first, But the owner taught me to work on larger inboard systems too. I learned about hydraulic steering, electrical systems, and hull maintenance. It wasn't Navy ships, but it gave me hands-on experience with maritime mechanical systems. For the first time since the Admiral had arrived, Elena saw something change in his expression. He looked at her more intently, as if he was seeing her in a new light. "Miss Martinez, can you show me your hands?" The request surprised everyone, including Elena. She held out her hands, palms up. They were calloused from years of manual labor, with small scars from working with tools and machinery. Her nails were clean but short, practical rather than decorative. Admiral Harrison examined her hands carefully, then looked up at her face with an expression that had grown considerably more serious. "Miss Martinez, may I ask you a very specific question? Have you ever worked on a diesel engine with a particular type of fuel injection system? Specifically, a Caterpillar 3406E marine engine?" Elena blinked in surprise. The question was oddly specific, and she couldn't understand why it would matter to her application. "Yes, sir, I have. The marina where I worked had several fishing boats with those engines. They're reliable, but they have issues with the fuel injection timing if they're not maintained properly." "Why do you ask?" The Admiral didn't answer immediately. Instead, he continued staring at Elena with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Around them, the crowd sensed that something significant was happening, though none of them understood what. "Miss Martinez," Admiral Harrison said slowly, "I need you to think very carefully about this next question. When you were working on those engines, did you ever notice anything unusual about the fuel injection system? Any modifications or special markings that seemed out of place on civilian equipment?" Elena frowned, trying to remember. "Well, there was one boat that had some strange additional components in the engine compartment. The owner said it was for improved performance, but the modifications didn't match anything in the standard repair manuals. There were some numbers stamped on parts that didn't correspond to normal Caterpillar part numbers." Admiral Harrison went very still. "Do you remember those numbers?" "Some of them, yes, sir. The sequence started with NR7, which seemed odd because civilian marine engines usually have CM or CS designations." Elena paused, noticing that the Admiral had gone pale. "Is something wrong, sir?" The Admiral was staring at Elena as if he had seen a ghost. Around them, the crowd continued to watch, but the nature of the conversation had shifted into something none of them could understand. Lieutenant Commander Chen looked confused, and even Lieutenant Brooks seemed to sense that something important was happening. "Miss Martinez," Admiral Harrison said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "I need you to think very carefully. Do you remember anything else about that boat or its owner? Any other details that seemed unusual or out of place?" Elena searched her memory, trying to understand why these questions were so important. The owner paid in cash for all repairs, which was unusual for work that expensive, and he always insisted on doing the final engine checks himself, even though our mechanics were perfectly capable. He said he had special requirements for the engine settings. Admiral Harrison closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, Elena could see something that looked like recognition, mixed with disbelief. "Miss Martinez, I need to ask you one more question, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you ever see any documents or identification that might have indicated this boat owner worked for the government?" Elena hesitated, remembering something she had almost forgotten. "Well, one day, he left a folder open on the dock while he was working on the boat. I didn't mean to look, but I saw what appeared to be some kind of military identification card with his picture on it. When he realized I had seen it, he seemed very concerned and asked me not to mention it to anyone." The Admiral's face had gone completely white. He stared at Elena for several long seconds before speaking in a voice that carried across the entire recruitment area, despite its quietness. "Miss Martinez," Admiral Harrison said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the recruitment area stop what they were doing. "I need you to describe this boat owner to me. Can you remember what he looked like?" Elena felt increasingly confused by the direction of the questioning, but she could see that her answers were having a profound effect on the Admiral. "He was probably in his 50s, sir. Medium height, graying hair, and he had a scar on his left hand that he said came from a fishing accident. He spoke with a slight accent that I couldn't place. And he always wore a baseball cap with an anchor insignia. Admiral Harrison's hands began to tremble slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his wallet and withdrew a small photograph, which he held so that only Elena could see it. Miss Martinez, is this the man you remember? No. Elena looked at the photograph and felt her breath catch. The image showed a man in naval uniform, younger than she remembered him but unmistakably the same person who had brought his boat to the marina for repairs. Yes, sir. That's him. But he's wearing a Navy uniform in this picture. At the marina, he always dressed like a regular boat owner. The Admiral carefully returned the photograph to his wallet, his movements slow and deliberate. When he looked up at Elena again, there were tears in his eyes. Miss Martinez, the man you describe is Lieutenant Commander James Morrison. He disappeared 3 years ago during a classified mission, and we have been searching for any trace of him ever since. The recruitment area fell completely silent. Even Marcus had stopped his commentary, sensing that something far more significant than a routine recruitment interview was taking place. Lieutenant Commander Chen looked shocked, while Lieutenant Brooks appeared to be struggling to understand what he was witnessing. Admiral Harrison continued, his voice stronger now but filled with emotion. Commander Morrison was operating undercover, investigating a network of individuals who were stealing and modifying military equipment for sale to foreign interests. His mission was to infiltrate their operation by posing as a civilian boat enthusiast who needed specialized engine modifications. Elena felt dizzy as the implications began to sink in. Sir, are you saying that the work I was doing on his boat was part of a military operation? More than that, Miss Martinez. The modifications you described, the part numbers you remember. Those details have helped us understand how Commander Morrison's cover was maintained and what happened during his final mission. For 3 years, military intelligence has been trying to piece together the circumstances of his disappearance. Admiral Harrison paused, collecting himself before continuing. The boat you worked on was equipped with specialized navigation and communication equipment disguised as performance modifications. The fact that Commander Morrison trusted you to work on those systems, and that you noticed the unusual elements without compromising his cover, tells me several important things about your character and abilities. Elena stared at the Admiral in disbelief. I had no idea, sir. He seemed like any other boat owner. Maybe a little more particular about his engine specifications, but nothing that suggested military involvement. That was exactly what made him effective in his cover role, Admiral Harrison replied. But Miss Martinez, there's something else. The fuel injection modifications you described were part of a coding system. The way those components were arranged would have allowed Commander Morrison to signal his status to other naval personnel without breaking his cover. The Admiral reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small notebook. He flipped through several pages before finding what he was looking for. Miss Martinez, when you worked on Commander Morrison's engine, did you notice that some of the modified components were positioned in a specific pattern? 3 components on the port side of the engine, 2 on the starboard side, arranged in a way that didn't seem mechanically necessary? Elena thought back to her time working in the engine compartment. Yes, sir. I remember thinking it was an odd configuration. It didn't improve engine performance, and it actually made some routine maintenance more difficult. But he insisted it had to be arranged exactly that way. May PR. Admiral Harrison nodded grimly. That arrangement was a signal, Miss Martinez. It indicated that Commander Morrison was in immediate danger and requesting emergency extraction. The fact that you noticed and remembered those details has just provided us with crucial intelligence about his final situation. The crowd of candidates and recruiters had grown even larger as word spread through the recruitment fair that something extraordinary was happening. Elena could see people pointing and whispering, trying to understand what was unfolding at the naval recruitment table. Marcus stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by confusion and a growing realization that he had severely misjudged the situation. Admiral, I don't understand. What does this woman's work at some marina have to do with naval recruitment? Admiral Harrison turned to face the entire group of candidates, his expression stern. Mr. Whitfield, what this young woman has just demonstrated is something that no amount of military academy training can teach. She has shown the ability to notice critical details, remember them accurately, and present them clearly under pressure. She has also demonstrated the discretion to keep sensitive information confidential, even when she didn't fully understand its importance. Lieutenant Commander Chen looked stunned as the full implications became clear. Admiral, are you saying that Miss Martinez's work experience has actually involved contact with classified naval operations? Inadvertent contact, Commander? But yes. And her handling of that contact demonstrates exactly the kind of judgment and integrity we need in naval officers. Admiral Harrison turned back to Elena. Miss Martinez, because of your connection to Commander Morrison's mission, you will need to be debriefed by naval intelligence. But I want you to know that your discretion and professionalism in this matter reflect great credit on your character. Elena felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Sir, I just want to know if this means I can still apply for the Naval Academy. Serving my country is still my primary goal, regardless of what happened at the marina. Admiral Harrison smiled for the first time since he had arrived at the recruitment fair. Miss Martinez, after what I've witnessed here today, your application will receive my personal recommendation. You have demonstrated more real-world judgment and practical intelligence in this conversation than most academy graduates show in their entire 4 years of training. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered around them. Let this be a lesson to everyone here about the danger of making assumptions based on appearances or backgrounds. Military service requires many qualities, but among the most important are integrity, attention to detail, and the ability to perform under pressure. Miss Martinez has demonstrated all of these qualities today. Marcus looked shaken as he began to understand how wrong he had been. Admiral, I owe Miss Martinez an apology. I made judgments based on prejudice rather than merit, and I was completely wrong. Lieutenant Brooks also stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment. Sir, I also spoke inappropriately about Miss Martinez's qualifications. I let my own biases cloud my professional judgment. Admiral Harrison nodded approvingly at their admissions. The ability to recognize and correct mistakes is also an important quality in military officers. Both of you have learned something valuable today about the importance of evaluating people based on their actual capabilities rather than superficial indicators. Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her, still struggling to process everything that had happened. Admiral, I need to ask about Commander Morrison. What happened to him? Is he safe? Admiral Harrison's expression grew somber. We're not certain of his current status, Miss Martinez. But the information you've provided gives us new leads to pursue. Your observations may help us finally determine what happened during his mission, and whether there's still hope for his recovery. Lieutenant Commander Chen began gathering Elena's application materials with new urgency. Miss Martinez, we'll need to expedite your security clearance process given your connection to this classified matter. But Admiral Harrison is right. Your application will receive the highest possible recommendation. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that her dreams of naval service were not only possible, but were being actively supported by one of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy. Thank you, sir. I promise I won't let you down. Admiral Harrison extended his hand to Elena, and she shook it firmly, feeling the calluses on his palm that marked him as someone who had also worked with his hands throughout his career. Miss Martinez, you've already proven yourself in ways that matter far more than academic credentials or family connections. The Navy needs officers who can think clearly, act with integrity, and notice the details that others miss. He turned to address the entire group one final time. Today has shown all of us that true qualification for military service comes from character, dedication, and the ability to serve something greater than yourself. Miss Martinez embodies these qualities, and I expect to see great things from her naval career. As Admiral Harrison prepared to leave, he pulled Lieutenant Commander Chen aside for a private conversation. Elena could see them speaking in low tones, with the commander taking notes and nodding frequently. When they finished, The Admiral returned to Elena one last time. Miss Martinez, someone from Naval Intelligence will contact you within the next 48 hours to discuss your experiences with Commander Morrison. In the meantime, please continue with your normal activities, but avoid discussing these matters with anyone outside of official channels. Elena nodded solemnly. I understand, sir. And thank you again for giving me this opportunity. As Admiral Harrison walked away, escorted by his security detail, Elena found herself surrounded by recruiters and candidates who wanted to congratulate her and hear more about what had just happened. The entire atmosphere of the recruitment fair had changed, with Elena now being treated as someone special rather than an outsider trying to prove herself. Marcus approached her hesitantly, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Elena, I owe you a sincere apology. I judged you unfairly and said things that were cruel and ignorant. You've shown more real qualification for naval service than any of us, and I hope you'll accept my apology. Elena looked at him for a moment before extending her hand. Apology accepted, Marcus. We all make mistakes, and you were brave enough to admit yours publicly. That says something good about your character, too. Lieutenant Brooks also approached, looking embarrassed but determined to make amends. Miss Martinez, I spoke unprofessionally about your application, and I was wrong. Your background is actually more relevant to naval service than I initially understood. I hope you'll accept my apology as well. Look tos. Rangering. End quote. I can't see Rangering. Elena shook his hand as well. Thank you, Lieutenant. I think we all learned something important today about not making assumptions about people. As the day wound down, Elena found herself processing applications and discussing her future with Lieutenant Commander Chen. The conversation that had started with mockery and dismissal had ended with a personal recommendation from an admiral and the promise of an expedited path to naval service. Lieutenant Commander Chen smiled as she handed Elena a folder containing her next steps. Miss Martinez, this has been the most unusual recruitment interview I've ever witnessed, but also one of the most impressive. Your combination of technical knowledge, practical experience, and personal integrity is exactly what we need in naval officers. Elena clutched the folder, still hardly believing that her long-held dream was finally becoming reality. Commander, I want you to know that I'll work harder than anyone to prove that Admiral Harrison's faith in me was justified. As Elena left the recruitment fair that evening, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a few hours. She had arrived as an unknown candidate from a small town, facing mockery and dismissal from those who judged her by her background rather than her abilities. She was leaving with the personal recommendation of an admiral and the knowledge that her years of hard work and self-directed learning had not only prepared her for naval service but had actually contributed to an important military investigation. The mocking voices that had tried to diminish her dreams had been silenced by the recognition of someone who truly understood what military service required. Elena knew that her journey was just beginning, but she also knew that she had already proven to herself and others that determination and character mattered more than privilege or connections. As she walked toward the bus that would take her home, Elena Martinez was no longer just a small-town dreamer with big ambitions. She was a future naval officer whose unique experiences and unwavering dedication had earned her a place among those who served their country with honor.